Hi, and a very good afternoon to everybody who has joined us. My name is Charmaine, and I'm working with the Communication and Information sector here in the UNESCO Regional Office for Eastern Africa. And today I've been given the responsibility and the privilege of welcoming all of you here to join us on this discussion on gender perspectives on artificial intelligence and the rule of law in Africa. And I don't want to take up too much time because I know the meat of the discussion is really the speakers who are coming after me. I just wanted to express my thanks to Lawyers Hub for making this happen, as well as to our speakers today, Teki, Nima, Lillian, and our moderator, Jorge, who you will get to meet and discuss many important issues with later. So I guess I just wanted to start by setting the context of why we are here today and why we have this webinar series. There are many things right now happening in the legal and the technological landscape that warrant this important discussion today. One being that there are many legal questions being raised about, the implications of artificial intelligence for human rights, for surveillance, for liability. And at the same time, and I think another issue happening in parallel is the increasing adoption of AI technologies in judicial systems, not just, from the rest of the world, but also in Africa. And with all these global conversations happening, we, UNESCO and the Lawyers Hub, really ask ourselves the questions about how can we contextualize this conversation to Africa, recognizing, not just the diversity of judicial systems across the world, worldwide, but also in Africa alone. And how can we bring people who are passionate and interested in this topic into the same space to air our perspectives, and in that way allow us to document some of these emerging issues that are coming up. So we're very happy to have you today contributing to this discussion because, and you might have seen in the video earlier about the Africa Law Tech Festival. Many discussions from the webinar today and perspectives that you share in the chat or with our speakers will also contribute towards a findings report that will be on gender perspectives on AI and the rule of law in Africa, and launched at the Africa Law Tech Festival in July 2024 this year. Sorry, could you just go back really quickly? And I promise I'll just take 30 more seconds. And so I just wanted to introduce all of us to some of UNESCO's work in partnership with judicial operators. Something that may be of interest to practitioners here would be a massive online open course on AI and the rule of law, which you can access at the link at judges.org/AI-ROL. And this is really a culmination of 10 years of the UNESCO Judges Initiative, now being 2024 since it was launched in 2014, working with judges and judicial actors on freedom of expression, public access to information, safety of journalists, and today and now, artificial intelligence and digital transformation. So there is actually also, as I've mentioned, the global parallel to this series. And if you're interested in finding out more about it and following the subsequent series, you can also scan this QR code right here to learn more about the conversations that are happening at the global level. Next slide. And just a parting shot. If you have enough steam after this webinar, we also have another one coming up just right after this is happening. So if you want to join more discussions after this, you can scan the QR code at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And so without further ado, I think I'm going to hand my time over to Jorge, who will take us through the rest of this session. Yeah. Thank you very much and welcome again to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Charmaine, for the presentation and the context provided to this series of webinars. This is the first out of 3, where, as Charmaine described it, we want to explore the intersections on the gender impacts of artificial intelligence and the judiciary system, the rule of law in Africa. If I have one moment, I would like to share my screen to share a few thoughts before I introduce the panelists. My name, for those who don't know me yet, is Jorge Clark, and I work as a strategic advisor for the Lawyers Hub, in particular in topics related with technology, innovation, and strategy. The aim of this series of webinars that we are doing in partnership with the East Africa Office of UNESCO is to take into consideration this rapid technological advancement, in particular in artificial intelligence, where if we put more into context, we can take a number out of this, and is the incredibly fast uptake of ChatGPT as an example, which in less than 3 months managed to have more than 100 million users. This is something that never happened before in human history. It's quite a record to reach more than 100 million users in less than 3 months. So we have artificial intelligence on one side, but we consider, UNESCO and the lawyers have, that these advancements in technologies should be inclusive and equitable. That's why today in this webinar, perspectives on artificial intelligence and the rule of law, we aim to delve in the intersections of gender, artificial intelligence, and the rule of law in the African context. Moreover, what we would like is to provide a platform for experts like our three panelists today to discuss the challenge, opportunities, and strategies for promoting gender equality in artificial intelligence development and deployment, while at the same time upholding the principles of the rule of law. And if I can share my screen now, I would like to briefly discuss with you two recent reports about gender biases in artificial intelligence. The one is a report that was published the 8th of March by the International Research Center on Artificial Intelligence under the auspices of UNESCO, another material from UNESCO. And you can download it for free. You can quickly find it. And if you go to the figure 1, and now I would like to quote the first figure in this report, discuss about the ways artificial intelligence perpetuates biases in decision making. For example, in the recruitment process, artificial intelligence tools reflect discriminatory hiring practices. In this point, there is an example, a strong example that was a scandal, which is the artificial intelligence Amazon developed, if I remember correctly, in 2016 to improve their recruitment process, which after a couple of weeks of being working, it decided that only men are good employees for Amazon at that time. So I think I don't need to tell more about this and how this represents a strong gender bias. Another way that this AI perpetuate biases in decision making, finance, and insurance, biases in determining credit scoring and loan approvals. This might impact not only on the gender point of view, but also on the ethnic point of view. Job displacement, disproportionate unemployment, how artificial intelligence can contribute to job displacement. In the development process of artificial intelligence, and the representation of women. This is not new for everyone. In the artificial intelligence industry, less than 20% of the people working on it are women. Lack of a political mandate, misuse, abuse of artificial intelligence stemming from weak implementation of regulatory frameworks and ethical guidelines. This is only just not even an appetizer of what you can find in this report. Then the second image is an article make it public on the 29th of February of 2024 from the Stanford Law School, which might be the law school that is the closest to Silicon Valley. And I would like to take the time to read the abstract, which I think will allow us to put a context to this conversation. So please give me a couple of minutes. The abstract announced the following. We employ an audit designed to investigate biases in a state-of-the-art large language models, including GPT-4. In our study, we prompt the models for advice involving a named individual across a variety of scenarios, such as during car purchase negotiation or election outcome predictions. We find that the advice systematically disadvantages names that are commonly associated with racial minorities and women. Names with Black women receive the least advantageous outcomes. The biases are consistent across 42 prompt templates and several models, indicating a systemic issue rather than isolated incidents. While providing numerical decision-relevant anchors in the prompt can successfully counteract the biases, qualitative details have inconsistent effects and may even increase disparities. Our findings underscore the importance of conducting audits at the point of large language model deployment and implementation to mitigate their potential for harm against marginalized communities. Here I would like to stop and present our panelists, but I would like just to repeat one sentence in the abstract of this recent article. Names associated with Black women receive the least advantageous outcomes. This is what happened with ChatGPT, for example, which I have just mentioned, already got more than 100 million users in less than 3 months. So we're facing a huge problem here, and we would like to understand how this is impact the judiciary system from a gender point of view. So what best way to do this is to try to build a community of women practitioners on the judiciary in Africa and invite them to let us know what are their concerns, fears, and preoccupations about the impacts of artificial intelligence in their work. So without further introduction or or words, sorry, I would like to introduce Ms. Teki Akwete. I'm sorry if my pronunciation is not the best. Teki, she is the founder and executive director of the Africa Digital Rights Hub, LBG, which is a think and action tank on digital rights issues in Africa. She was the first executive director to set up the Data Protection Commission of Ghana and facilitated the implementation of the Ghana's Data Protection Act. She is also a senior partner at Nsaya Akwete and Company, a law firm based in Accra, Ghana, that specializes in information technology and telecommunication law in Africa. Teki is going to discuss about gendered impacts of artificial intelligence in African legal system. How can legal system in Africa be adapted to mitigate gender bias in artificial intelligence applications? Are the existing legal frameworks in African countries that can be leveraged to promote gender equality in artificial intelligence development and deployment? And she will ask maybe many other questions that the audience will present. So, Teki, please, I give you the room. I stop sharing my screen and starting to listen to you with all my attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Lawyers Hub for inviting me to be part of this all-important conversation. I'm trying to share my screen here. I believe you could see it. And so I'm going to be talking about the gendered impacts of AIs in Africa legal systems today. And from where I sit, I categorize the gendered impacts into 2 broad areas, especially because we're looking at this from the context of Africa's legal systems. So we have the direct, what I call the direct technological impact issues, and then we have the law or the legal system related impact issues. For the technological impact issues, and as Ohe has already mentioned some of them, one of the biggest challenges we've seen around the gendered impact include algorithmic bias, which comes from a number of the systemic challenges that have gone into the development of these technologies, including the fact that there has not been usually a lot of data, particularly that is centered around our continent, and more so around issues relating to gender, to provide more informed and a balanced structure in terms of decision-making with these algorithms. And so we see a lot of challenges around the bias. Also, the broader challenge, which is not necessarily just an AI issue, but is aggravated by AI, has to do with the issues of access to some of these AI tools, and especially within the context of gender. If we look at our continent, majority of our populations include our women. And most of these women, when it comes to the level of skills, we can say fall within the more informal sector, and a lot without formal education. And so that in itself even affects the issue of what does it mean then if we're talking about AIs coming in, AIs taking on board more routine tasks and the rest. And so that again could create a challenge around who has access to these tools, how it is used. And of course, invariably, it will affect more African women than not, even in the normal scale of affairs, because a lot of these women will fall within the informal sector. A lot of them will fall also within the sector that lacks the skill and the knowledge to be able to even use some of these tools, well, in spite of the advantages that a lot of these tools bring. Having said that, so then there is the need for education and training. And that is also an area where we've not done a lot of, right? Most of these technologies are developed, usually majority of them outside of our continent and context, and we tend to be users of it. And if you look at even the education and the training level and access to education and training, a lot of women fall far behind. So even when it comes to the challenges that we see, particularly with potential loss of jobs in areas like administrative and clerical work, customer service, routine agricultural jobs, that you find a lot of gender-related activities in, we tend to see that there are likely to be significant job displacements as we move more into the use of AI tools and all of that. What needs to be done is the fact that we need to upskill and reskill these people that are being displaced from some of these opportunities. And so when you're really looking at the technological impact, you look at that. Of course, when it comes to innovation, I would say that there are pluses and minuses that come with it. We know that the potential of AI to scale up innovation, to even enhance how the gender issues are addressed is still, that potential is there. But we are currently not doing enough to necessarily activate some of these areas. And so these are some of the impacts that we're looking at. On the law side, you want to look at the guarantee of fundamental rights. Whereas we want to ensure that the legal systems that continue to apply in this space. Of course, currently there are existing laws across most African countries, like laws around privacy, cybersecurity, and the rest, which to some extent protect individuals, and particularly women within this context. However, we can also see, and we're beginning to see, that when it comes to the gendered impact of some of these laws, we haven't necessarily mastered the art of ensuring that these laws particularly protect the fundamental rights of the vulnerable in our societies as well. Now, the challenges also around ensuring that there is equitable opportunities for all gender, irrespective of the technologies, have also not been scaled over. If you're looking at access to justice, there is the potential to use these AI tools to enhance justice delivery. However, that could also be a challenge in that if we do not address some of the challenges that have earlier been mentioned, and also that I started with around algorithmic bias and all of that, we may end up creating more challenges around access to justice and justice delivery as we continue to explore movement of some of these, explore use of some of these technologies in addressing that. And I believe that one of the biggest areas to our rule of law has been the conflict of law issues. Most of the laws that we see in our context usually are not as advanced as elsewhere. Again, a lot of these technological tools are not being developed within our context. And so if you take on an average, the average huge AI company today is not necessarily an African company, is not necessarily based in any African countries, which means that most of these laws are being governed by laws outside of our jurisdictions and being applied to our jurisdictions. And that technically creates the potential for a number of conflict of laws, where we may have situations where in our context, we may not necessarily be able to, even within the context of our laws, adequately protect our citizens because, one, the institutions are not necessarily based here, and one, our laws are not crafted in a harmonized way to facilitate collaboration that actually enables us protect our communities as well. And of course, we have the normal legal and regulatory challenges that we continue to face. And these are quite broad, from not having adequate laws to circumstances where even where we have the laws, we're not putting in place effective enforcement mechanisms. And even where we put in place the effective enforcement mechanisms, we are not adequately looking at the gendered impact of some of these laws to specifically look at policies and approaches from the legal and regulatory perspective that actually minimizes the gendered, the negative gendered impacts of that. In terms of opportunities, AI itself actually presents a lot of opportunities in the legal and in the legal systems itself. That is, if we skew it properly, there are opportunities for education, for training, for upskilling. I had earlier mentioned opportunities for innovation, both in the innovation in terms of enhancing, the gender, the ability to address some of the gender challenges that exist in our ecosystem. It has the ability to enhance access to justice. And then also how it has the ability to really address some of the gender issues that we face, particularly around diversity, inclusion, healthcare, gender-based violence, and so forth and so on. And so looking at it on its own, yes, there are gendered impacts. Some of these impacts create challenges, but there are also opportunities to enable us address some of these issues. And so what I want to propose as strategies to help us really look at this is to have start having those considerations and discussions around the ethical and the moral issues surrounding AI and the gendered impact of AIs on our legal systems. I think if for nothing at all, it is important to actually increase research to start looking at how is it affecting the ethical and moral considerations that go along these issues in our various communities, and what are the strategies that can help us minimize some of these issues. Once we do a lot more introspection, a lot more research that is specific to our communities, then we need to come up with deliberate policies and mechanisms that can be undertaken. I'll give you an example of some work that lately we've been doing around the laws and its impact, for instance, on gender-related issues. Albeit it is not necessarily specific to AI, we have looked at, for instance, areas like data protection. And we've recognized that a lot of the laws that we have passed in the last decade or so seem to have a gender proactive measure, right? In that normally in the development of these laws and policies, we put out particular policies that promote gender equality and gender equity. However, what we noticed is that when it comes to the implementation of these policies and laws, there is still a gap. And these gaps come in because we are not necessarily looking at deliberate mechanisms that can address the specific challenges that we have faced. So if you're talking about gendered impact of AI, I have spoken about the issue of skills, the issue of knowledge, majority of women falling within the informal sector, for instance. So assuming that we have passed a very great data protection law that protects all citizens, including these women, how do we then ensure that we are able to get them to address these issues effectively? I've sat in at a round table in focus groups with women around some of these challenges. And it was actually unearthing to even realize that in situations where the information was being collected, they were not fully aware of what that information was being collected about them, how it was being used. And that was because of the formal language within which these exercises are being conducted. And there was no deliberate approach to necessarily inform these women in a language that they understand of the impact of the information that is being taken on them, whatever laws are there to protect them, and how they themselves can protect themselves. And so it's very important to address some of these gendered impacts, to have deliberate policies and mechanisms that target the actual challenges faced by the particularly women and vulnerable groups within our societies. Also, we need to think around how we're going to approach the issue of harmonized frameworks, especially in the context that we find ourselves in. There is no way that in the near future, all these technologies are going to come from our jurisdictions, and these technologies understand our laws. But with harmonized frameworks, we will be able to facilitate better collaboration and cooperation around law enforcement and protection of our citizens. And so again, we need to think around the development of our legal systems to facilitate harmonization, to facilitate cooperation within and outside of our various jurisdictions as well. And last but not the least, we need to have a strategy around education, because the biggest impact, as we have heard from her and others, and I believe we'll hear from others and myself earlier, as well has to do with the fact that majority, if you look at Africa, majority of our women fall within the informal sector. And even for those that fall within the formal sector, if you look at the kind of jobs, for instance, that we've predicted AI may replace, a lot of these jobs will fall to women in the space. For instance, routine agricultural jobs, clerical jobs, and administrative jobs. We know that a lot of these are women. Now, when it comes to technological knowledge and skill also, we are also aware through a number of research that women fall far behind men when it comes to that. So having the gendered impact means that when it comes to the adoption and the use of some of these technologies to create an equitable and a fair society where everyone benefits effectively from these technologies, we need to look at how we're going to educate and train, particularly those that, the gendered groups that fall within the low and the informal sector, who will most be impacted by a number of these technologies. And I think at this point, I just want to conclude to say that there is a lot happening. It's not all doom and gloom. However, we have to be, as a continent, as people that work in the legal systems, we have to be very deliberate about these issues. And in order to be deliberate, one, we must clearly identify where the challenges are and put in place specific mechanisms, be they education, be they having the rights kind of laws, to promote and to ensure that we do not leave anyone behind. Thank you. I think I can stop here.
Thanks to you, Teki. Thanks a lot for your presentation. I kept one line of what you said, is how to adequately protect African citizens. If we can narrow down this on the perspective of this webinar series, is how can we adequately protect women African citizens? And we are going to discuss further about this later on, but for me, there is this crucial point that if we are conscious that, globally speaking, today, we haven't been super successful or successful enough to protect Afro-American women or women citizen. And we have now this innovation, this big tool, artificial intelligence, that presents, as you have just mentioned, a lot of opportunities, but at the same time can reproduce, and not only reproduce, but increment bias that will have a negative impact in Afro-American women or just women African citizens. What can we do next to exactly said what you mentioned, adequately protect this portion of the population? Just want to put this on the table to discuss it after all the panelists have presented. So thank you again, Teki. And now I have the honor of presenting Lilian Olivia Orero, which is the founder of Safe Online Women Kenya, SOW Kenya, a Ban Ki-moon Global Citizen Scholar, Mandela Washington Fellow, Datasphere Initiative Fellow, and advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She has a career spanning over 5 years, operates in the nexus of law and technology and gender, and her research has led her to many different prestigious institutions. And Lilian is going to discuss about ensuring gender inclusivity in artificial intelligence development, trying to tackle questions such as what are some best practices for ensuring diverse data sets are used to train artificial intelligence models used in legal context? How can developers identify and mitigate gender bias within artificial intelligence algorithms? And what role can governments and organizations play in promoting gender diversity within the field of artificial intelligence research? So, Lillian, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jorge. So when we hear the term gender inclusivity in the context of AI, you might ask yourself, what does that mean? So basically, we are trying to say that AI technologies should be developed in a manner that considers all the diverse needs, perspectives, and experiences of individuals and all genders. So when we talk about gender, we are not just simply referring to the binary of male and female, but we are also trying to look at the complex and the multifaceted concept that it brings with it in terms of looking at the various identities, experiences, and expression. So today in our discussion, I'd like us to explore how gender inclusivity can be achieved at 3 levels. So the first level is the technical level, where we will try to look at how algorithms account for all necessary variables to classify users in a non-discriminatory manner. Then the second level is the community level. And in this level, we try to look at how the AI development teams looks at gender representation during the development process. Then the third level is the user level, where we try to focus on the intended users of these AI systems and how research and implementation of these processes consider their needs, perspectives, and feedback. So why is gender inclusivity in AI important? This fundamental principle actually shapes fairness, trustworthiness, and effectiveness. And if our AI systems do not have gender inclusivity, then we have the risk of perpetuation of bias and disparities. And I would just like to give us some of the best practices for ensuring that diverse data sets are used to train AI models in the legal context. So when we talk about data sets, these are what forms the basis of training, evaluating, and even benchmarking machine learning models. And so the first best practice would be utilizing a diverse range of data sources. So for instance, in the legal space, if you have an AI system assisting you with legal research, then data has to come from various sources such as court cases, legal documents, statutes, and regulations. And so I found an example in Kenya where we have Wakili AI and Wakili, which are AI technologies that have really tried to look at a diverse range of data sources, and they are crafted to provide lawyers with suggestion in real-time consultations so that they tailor their recommendations to the user's specific requirements. The second best practice is the use of pre-trained models for efficiency. So Jorge had mentioned ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is like a large language model that is now being used by so many people in the world. I'm trying to say that when we have pre-trained models, for instance, instead of training legal AI models from scratch, it's advisable to leverage on pre-trained language models such as OpenAI, GPT-3, or even Google Bart, because these models are already trained on vast amount of legal text, enabling them to generate accurate, relevant outputs. But the question that would come is, how accurate will this training of the text be? Because if we look at the African context, we have multiple languages, and how have these large language models, for instance, used Swahili in their training? So those are some of the questions I would like us to think about. Then when we look at how developers can identify and even mitigate gender bias in AI algorithm, you find that gender bias occurs in 4 ways. So the first way is through data bias. So for example, you can have historical hiring data that is skewed towards male candidates being selected for certain roles. And this AI algorithm is trained on this data. So chances are it will favor male candidates in future hiring decisions. Second form of bias, which Teki mentioned, is the algorithmic bias. And this form of bias is where an algorithm is trained to recognize faces, for instance, primarily based on data from a specific demographic group. And it might perform poorly when applied to individuals from another demographic group. The third form of bias is what we call representation bias, and a lack of representation for certain groups of people in the development and testing phases really leads to bias. And as human beings, we are already biased inherently. So imagine of the developers who are even feeding data into these systems. Then we have what we call a feedback loop, where, for instance, if you have a recommendation system which consistently suggests lower paying jobs for women, then this is already biased on historical data, and it may contribute to perpetuating gender wage gaps. So I'd like to give us like real-life example or cases of how AI and gender bias is perpetuating itself in the legal context. So we have the first form of bias, which is through the natural language processing, and this can occur in 2 ways. So the first way is through the text corpora bias, where you will find that, for instance, in legal documents, court cases, and legal precedents, historically, there are biases reflecting societal norms and inequalities. So if the training data includes biased language or decisions, then the resultant models can inherit and potentially amplify this form of bias. The second one is what we call word embeddings. So for instance, if you have a natural language model that is trained on where certain professions such as judge, lawyer, and partner are predominantly mentioned in association with the male pronouns or names, then that model will learn to encode this gendered association. And when presented with a new text or data, then the model would exhibit biased association. And so the other form of bias is bias in digital image. So we have facial recognition technology, and in Kenya, we're using this technology, for instance, to identify suspects and ensure efficient security management. However, these facial recognition technologies have been shown to be highly biased, particularly for dark skin toned and gender non-conforming individuals. So take an example of a woman who has short hair and deep voice. So these features are socially constructed to be male features. And therefore, such biases would even lead to over-policing of Black individuals, women, and gender non-conforming individuals. And so, as mentioned earlier, algorithms are typically developed in the global north. And when we look at the training of the data sets, they're so different from our African context. So big tech such as Google, Microsoft, Meta, IBM have tried to make strides in the global south by setting up research labs, development centers, and even data centers. So you might think that, wow, that's amazing because it appears to be beneficial to the local ecosystem. However, this still is a gap because when we look at our African local talent, we are still not highly specialized when it comes to roles that can fit into these shoes. However, all hope should not be lost because I also have some examples of emerging local AI practitioners and research groups that have really tried to address issues around agriculture, healthcare, and education. So for instance, we have initiatives such as Bala, which is a smart keyboard that is the first mobile phone application that is supporting spell checking of Swahili or even Shona. And it's just an example of a homegrown technology that indeed meets the local population and fills the gap that is normally overlooked by big tech. And so what role does the government or even organizations play when it comes to promoting gender diversity? So as government, one thing I would recommend is to adopt an industry-specific framing of AI. Most of the time, artificial intelligence is overlooked in development and gender policy, and it's put in general terms like ICT and technology. And such generalization actually perpetuates gender disparities in AI development. So to address this, policymakers should explicitly define AI, what AI means in the African context. And by doing so, they can then ensure that we have gender mainstreaming efforts to integrate AI in the development process. Then when it comes to education and training, which was also mentioned, my organization is trying to see how to encourage young women and girls to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, because women and minorities in gender are underrepresented when it comes to AI research. And some of our homegrown institutions, such as Data Science Africa, Deep Learning Indaba, are really contributing greatly to representing African scholars in artificial intelligence and machine learning conferences. And this really increases the publication number and the application to our local problem. So as I conclude, as a researcher, I would say it's also fundamental to really invest in funding research, particularly for AI development in Africa. And an institution called Artificial Intelligence for Development, AI4D, Africa, is already doing this. So there's a project in Makerere University in Uganda that is focusing on understanding gender biases in automatic speech recognition systems and developing mitigation strategies. So when you look at virtual assistants, most of the time first, this form of AI technologies have a gendered voice. And it also seems to appear that they're supposed to take orders from people, and that perpetuates gender bias when it comes to labeling women as, taking orders from people. So this particular project is trying to find a way to be inclusive and equitable to all its users when it comes to automatic speech recognition systems. Then there's another project in the DRC by Co23 Lab that is just trying to consider linguistic and cultural diversity. As Africa, we are blessed to have so many languages, but that also comes with a challenge, because if we have AI technologies that do not explain or cater to the diversity of our culture and language, then it perpetuates bias during the development process. And finally, in Kenya, the Center for Africa Epistemic Justice investigates how inclusion of women in Kenya's informal economy contributes to inclusive digitalization. So I want to say that it's good we are having such discussions, because through these discussions, then we are able to see how best to have gender inclusivity in AI development. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Lillian, for your exposition, which took in consideration root elements of the technological point of view. Sorry to rephrase the same word, but where all these biases are technically rooted. I take 2 points from your presentation, Lillian, for the discussion at the end. The first one, when you mentioned as an alternative, you mentioned it as a possible best practice for diverse datasets or diversity within datasets, was the use of pre-trained models for efficiency. But there is a problem here. I think a pre-trained model, as you mentioned, could be one of these generative artificial intelligence, large language model like BART or GPT-4. And today, there are, I think every day, there must be hundreds of applications that are being built upon these generative AI systems. The problem is that, as we mentioned at the beginning, these pre-trained models are already biased, deeply biased, especially against Afro-American women, Black women. And this is a fact. So if we use this pre-trained model, we are going to be reproducing this type of bias. So how can we approach this? Because if we are going to use these pre-trained models, we will be forced to use something to prevent us from reproducing a bias that is already within these pre-trained models. That's one of the questions for later. The second one is, you mentioned the role of governments and organizations, and you pay it special, or you put it special emphasis in what artificial intelligence means in the African context. I think this is a key element. Just to point out something, for the recently signed Artificial Intelligence Act from the European Union, they worked on the definition of what is an artificial intelligence system for almost a year, I believe. Almost a year, maybe more, just to define what is artificial intelligence system, to make the law, the regulation around this as robust as possible, especially with the fast changing of the fast speed of changing of the technology, and thinking in the future how this might change. Now, what you propose is how this definition should be or can be adapted within the African context. And I think this is a key element. Second point for further discussion later on. Once again, Lillian, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to present our third panelist from today, Mr. Nima Jaji. Yes, I see you, Nima. Nima, she is a program officer on human and people's rights at the Pan-African Lawyers Union, PALU. One of her main mandates is assisting implementation of human and people's rights in Africa by contributing to the promotion of human rights, democratic governance, and the rule of law with a diverse range of stakeholders across the continent. She is also leading and coordinating the business and human rights portfolio at PALU. Nima holds a master's degree in international law with international relations, and she's going to be discussing about empowering women in the legal tech sector. Some questions she will address is, what are some of the biggest challenges women face in entering and succeeding in the legal tech sector in Africa? Examples of successful initiatives or programs that are empowering women in legal tech across Africa, and recommendations that she may propose for creating a more inclusive and supportive environment for women in legal tech. So, Nima, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Lisa, can you share my slides, please? The next slide, please. Well, in terms of challenges that women face when entering into the legal tech sector, first of all, what we should note is that we do not have enough women within the legal sector itself. And more also, we do not have women, with enough women within the technological sector. So most of these women, for instance, the ones that want to enter within the legal tech sector, or who want to transition within it, or who want to make major changes in it, or who want to make investment within the sector, they really lack motivation because they do not see enough women out there doing the same thing, but also they lack inspiration, and they also lack role models who can guide them and show them how to go about it. So that is the biggest challenge that we face, that we do not have enough women. And this is not only within the legal sector itself. Actually, it's an overall challenge within the STEM, within the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So what women face is they do not have people to look up to, which sometimes more resist. The other thing is the funding issue. Most women face funding obstacles, especially when they want to raise capital for their startups, or maybe they need loans from financial institutions. And this is because, first of all, the financial sector in most African countries is gender biased in most of the countries in Africa. So most of these women face a lot of regularities problems. Sometimes you are not granted a loan simply because you have no evidence of having enough male figure that will ensure that you can pay back the loan. Or people feel like you are a woman and you are only domesticated, so it is very difficult to lend you money or give you enough financial resources to support whatever that you want to do. But something else is the work-life balance challenge. Most women are not supported by their institutional frameworks, but also within their legal frameworks. They're not supported in terms of doing their work in a very conducive environment. For instance, when you look at a lot of labor laws within Africa, they do not give women enough time to tend for their family affairs, especially women who have gone or are intending to go for their maternity leave, and giving them enough space where they can be able to accommodate their work life and their personal life. So this becomes a challenge because overall, legal sector, whether it's within the technological perspective or technological field or any other field, it needs enough time to dedicate yourself to. So if you're not given enough room to accommodate your personal life and your work life, it becomes very difficult for women to venture within the legal tech sector. But also there is a knowledge gap within the legal sector, and this you can look at from different angles. The first angle is from the gender perspective. It is always seen as a norm that men are the ones who are so much into legal tech, and they possess so much knowledge and skills in terms of this sector. But also when we look at the aspect of the young professionals, for instance, the young professional women who are getting into the legal tech sector, they're not given enough knowledge. First of all, most of our curriculums do not teach ICT law, especially in Africa. ICT is a late bloomer within our continent, So we have young lawyers within the legal tech who do not have the necessary knowledge, but we also have the lawyers that have been within the space for so long who feel like technology is too much of a work for them to transition into it. So this knowledge gap that exists becomes a big challenge for women to succeed within the legal tech sector. But also the gender stereotypes, which covers almost everything that I've mentioned in terms of challenges. Most of the legal sector is male dominated because it's a conservative field by nature. But also, again, technology is not well advanced to encourage so many women into it. So you find that the gender stereotypes within the legal tech sector itself prevent women to venture into it and try to be part of it. Next slide, please. However, we have different programs and initiatives that have been taken to empower women within the legal tech across the continent. For instance, the AU has tried through its policy, the AU Agenda 2063. This has been adapted to eliminate all gender inequalities in various spheres in life. And AI and technology has been part of it. So from a continental level, or when we look at it from a point of view, then that is a successful initiative that has been taken by the states of Africa. But also we have Africa Gender Innovation Club, which is also supported by the World Bank. This is a platform for African women innovators and people within the technology sector to develop and test new technological solutions which are gender related. So this provides evidence of the challenges that are being faced and the solutions that can be used to solve these challenges. For instance, they look in terms of an equal payment, employment opportunities, if they really address the gender aspect of it all. But we also have individuals who have taken it upon themselves and made it a calling to start initiatives in helping women within the legal tech sector. For instance, this has been done a lot in South Africa. Actually, generally, South Africa is very advanced in terms of human rights and promoting innovations. So with South Africa, we have people like Naomi, who try to do different initiatives in helping women. For instance, they hold on Twitter spaces, they help host women who want to transition into legal tech sector. So all these are the initiatives and programs that help to accommodate women and make them feel comfortable within the legal tech sector. Next slide, please. In terms of recommendation, I would recommend, first of all, we need to have people, especially lawyers and policymakers, who can advocate for policies and legal frameworks that are gender sensitive, especially within the tech space, that would address these challenges. Because as much as you can have, and this actually is a challenge within the African continent, as much as you can have instruments, the continental instruments or the regional instruments within Africa, but if you do not have national instruments, then that work won't be easily implemented or the problem won't be easily solved, because you may have a regional instrument, for instance, which does not even have implementation or enforcement mechanism. Then you have states which do not have those laws or do not have those policies, or they have not even ratified those laws. So the ones who are suffering are the people on the ground. That means these are the ordinary average citizens. So you'll have women within the legal tech sector who, yes, they have big instruments that are regulating them from a regional continental level, but they do not have instruments that protect them or regulate them within their national spaces. So you'll find these women within this space are always vulnerable. So the best thing is, as much as we may have regional or continental instruments, we need to advocate for these policies within our national states, within states and governments. But also we need equal access to resources. It's high time that financial institutions, they realize that even women can actually have startups, can have big firms, and they can have different corporations where they can be used to do transformation within their societies. So they need to have access to these financial resources, because sometimes you need to have, maybe if it's a partnership, you need to have the majority of the partners who are male for you to be given a loan, something which is very unrealistic. We have a lot of female spaces, female organization, corporations that want to do this kind of transformation. So if they cannot access the financial resources, that means all the work that they intend to do will be impossible or won't be efficient. But most importantly, we need enough capacity building sessions to bridge the knowledge gap that exists from the gender perspective, but also from the professional gap that exists. For instance, at Pan-African Lawyers Union, we have different committees for different fields in law. For instance, we have the ICT Law Committee, where we conduct a good number of capacity building sessions for different lawyers in terms of ICT, AI, and technological law. So in my view, those are the best way forward that we can use to address this issue. But before I complete my presentation, I would like to leave you guys with one question. Probably I'll get the answer before we wind up our webinar. Like, are we really willing to accommodate women when entering the legal tech sector, for instance, in terms of payments, in terms of opportunities, because as much as we may have all these things addressed, but if we are not willing to accommodate them, for instance, in terms of opportunities, they can have financial resources, but opportunities open up for them. Are the employers or the people that they're partnering with willing to pay them equally as their male counterparts? Because those are the biggest issues that we need to flag. Thank you so much, Jorge.
Nima, okay, there it goes. Nima, thank you so much to you, and I got completely captured by your last question. Are we really willing to accommodate women within the tech or legal tech sector? And I see that when you said accommodate, you mean this in a large sense, taking into consideration many aspects, including, for example, a correct balance of personal life and work, and a balance in the from the salary point of view. And this is a specific or a particular case, a particular representation of a larger question, which is basically the same. And we as a humanity, we haven't yet addressed it properly, which is, are we really willing to accommodate women in a professional level in all different types of work? For example, the gap on the salary between women and men is still an issue basically everywhere. And so when you ask this question, I imagine that it somehow connect with this environmental approach that you mentioned. Is, are we willing to accommodate women in the legal tech sector as professionals? When you say we, I imagine you talk about the societies, our societies. Are we really ready to do this? And I would like to say yes. Maybe from an individual perspective, I can say yes. Maybe you can say yes. But when I look at our societies, I don't see a clear yes. I see a lot of but in the way towards this. And it's a very large question that maybe we should be asking and putting on the table permanently for the next 200 years, maybe, and try to push in that direction. This should be considered as a north of evolution, going to an improvement in the gender balance development of societies. And this alone makes me connect with what you pointed out, like we need an environmental approach, because you mentioned many initiatives in Africa, some of them individual initiatives, which is like spearheading something when the first approach to try to break a wall. But what we need is a global approach to this. So I would like to open the discussion with the three panelists and to start with this discussion and later pass to the Q&A session using the questions from the audience. I would like to ask two very simple questions to the three panelists, which is, the first one is, could you tell us an example of your personal life where you have experienced the negative consequences of gender bias related issue within the universe of technology and law? in the judiciary system, in your daily basis work. Just share an example, because one example from three women like you could make the audience feel how this bias manifests in reality. That's question one. And my second question would be, could you prioritize a list of three concerns or fears of the negative impacts of artificial intelligence in the judiciary system in the African context? Just these two questions to start. Maybe we can get again, repeat the cycle and start with the techie.
Okay, so the first, does it have to be my own experience or a woman's experience in terms of bias?
I think it would be to make it more tangible. If it's a story about you, it will be more sensible for all of us here. But if you don't want to share a specific personal story, you can share
I believe I have experienced something, but it's not necessarily coming to mind now. You know, but yes, but we experience biases almost on a daily basis. I think some of which has been shared. In my case, sometimes even within the context of your name, right? You're categorized as a male, or you're not even categorized as African at all, and that. And sometimes even by being African, or sometimes even the fact that I am a lawyer with specialization in technology, you know, people naturally assume, without seeing you, these technologies just assume that you're a male, you know, and so within that context, you're sometimes addressed to as a male, but those are like really salient. I think nothing significant comes up for me now. In terms of prioritizing the concerns, I think for me, within the African context, the biggest concerns that I have has to do with particularly women that fall within the minority, that are also in the majority on our continent, especially those that fall within the informal sector. And my biggest concerns that I have is also the issues around job displacements. And you know, we've spoken it out there that these people can be skilled, right? But if you have a woman that is, let's say, working on a refuse dump, and that is her daily life, and she uses technologies in one way or the other, and sometimes AI technologies kick her out of her job without any formal education. The big challenge I have is what should reskilling really look like, especially within our context. So it's not just a simple thing about reskilling, because some of these people are not necessarily reskillable. And so we really need to start addressing some of these challenges from the point of view is, what are we doing? Are we retraining them or reskilling them to work in other sectors? Or are we looking at upgrading them? Also, another of my biggest concern, which is connected to this issue, has to do with the laws that we have. I believe we've mentioned that what do we have to do to protect them? Personally, I do not think that it is always the laws necessarily The laws are important to protect and all of that. But what I have seen with the gender issues in the last, let's say, 2 decades across Africa is that these laws are not necessarily doing what we're putting them out to do. In that we are passing a lot of these laws and we're not necessarily enforcing or putting in place enough enforcement mechanisms to protect and realize the objectives for which these laws are passed. And so one of my biggest areas that we need to prioritize, even beyond passing the laws, is prioritizing enforcement and how we can use the laws, particularly to protect the vulnerable, especially women within these contexts. Nothing comes to mind as the third, but I think for me, these are the 3 areas that I want to prioritize, and making sure that the laws are there and they are working. We're ensuring that the laws work to protect us, those that we set out the laws to protect, and then ensuring that we put enough thought and effort into the issues around bias, into the issues around job loss and the like. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for giving your thoughts on the first couple of questions. And maybe Lillian, you can take the floor now and give us your feedback on this couple of questions just to start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jorge. The one form of bias I remember experiencing was just using my phone to like unlock, but as women, we're always changing our hairstyles. So in that particular moment, I did not have my wig and it refused to like allow me to access my phone. So that's like a personal example of how I'm sure like as a woman, we experience on a daily basis sometimes. So in terms of
it was your own phone that didn't recognize you.
Yes, so like
Oh my
you
God.
have your phone and different gadgets, you already signed with the facial recognition, but because you changed your hair, it just didn't agree. I see Teki can relate. So yes, to answer your questions, the big concern for me would be in terms of pre-trained language models. I'm big on language because as Africa, we have diverse groups of languages. So for me, I am looking at a scenario where we are able to use multilingual pre-trained language models so that African languages are also included in the training of AI technologies. And one of the effective approaches would be like using a language adaptive fine-tuning, where you try to, because this is the thing, most of the developers try and argue that just targeting one specific language individually really takes a large disk space and it limits cross-lingual transfer abilities. However, I'm saying we can try and be up to the task if we did want to be part of the conversations around impact of AI positively on gender. So at the moment, those are the feedbacks I'm thinking about.
You would consider this one as one of your big concerns of fear?
As a concern.
Okay. So I have
Yes.
I have a concern on top of your concern.
Okay.
We can have this approach of multilingual pre-trained models, but what if these pre-trained models are still being developed by a bunch of white Caucasian men in San Francisco area? We can have a nice approach with a multilingual pre-trained models, but still the developers team behind is I don't know, 70 or to 80% men and maybe 70 to 80% white Caucasian. And so these biases are going to still be flowing there. We will keep the discussion later on, just to build a concern on top of a concern. Thank you, Lillian. And so we can have Nima to address the two questions and story. Nima, yes, you are.
Thank you, Jorge. Well, actually, the point where I first, actually, this is something I first, sometimes it's not a one-time thing, is that when you show up in work setting or professional setting, and you find that people are expecting a man instead of a woman, so they'll be asking you, have you actually come for this? And you tell them yes. And the next question will be, are we expecting somebody else? And she'll be like, no, you only have me. So you have me to deal with. So that is one of the biases that I face all the time. But on the second question, in terms of concerns and fear, actually, my biggest concern and fear, especially within the judiciary, as far as gender and AI is concerned, is that I have observed, also have that feeling that the African judicial system itself as an institution and the members of the judiciary, first of all, they are not so willing, they're very reluctant in adapting technology within their systems. First, as an institution, for instance, you find most of their activities, most of the works that are being done by the judiciary, most judiciaries in Africa, they are not automated. That is one. So the fear is Africa itself will lag behind in terms of technology, in terms of AI, in terms of ICT. That is the first thing. But the judiciary, as far as the members are concerned, that is the judges, the justices, the magistrates. These people, first of all, most of them are conservative by nature. So they're not people who are very willing to adapt this, other than the system itself, the institution itself, as individuals. So we might end up finding ourselves that as much as we really want to have the policies, the laws that accommodate all the laws that speak on AI and legal tech, but we have an institution, a whole institution, and individuals that run this institution that are not in support of the technology itself.
So
that
we
is
face
my
again this environmental barrier.
Yes. So you might end up having, for instance, you have the laws that support these things. Then, for instance, you have a case, you go to court, a case with regards to AI, or maybe something to do with data protection or cybersecurity. And you have a bench that is not even supporting whatever that you're talking about, and a bench that is not willing to learn or to know more about it. So you find yourself that you already have a biased perspective from people who you expect to adjudicate on your matter. So these people, we have to remember that the judiciary itself is the one that sets precedent on these things. So once you have precedent setters who are biased, is already a problem. So personally, those are my biggest fear and concerns, especially when judiciary is concerned.
Thank you very much, Nima. And we have a very few minutes left, and I think we can pack this environmental barrier, as you put it, Nima, and how the sector presents resistance on this. Regarding why I ask you for this person to share this personal story is because I have a story, not my friend, not my story, but a lawyer friend, a woman back in Chile, my country, where I come from, also in the global south. She was a super performant lawyer in a big firm, big lawyer firm in Chile. And she pushed it. Apparently, she was doing a super great job. And at some point, she was aware of this and she wanted to be part of the board, which was a board full of men. And she thought that she deserved it. And many people, many colleagues thought that she deserved it because she was doing a really, really, really good job. And she called for this. She asked to be part of the board. And this was denied. And few weeks later, she was fired. And she understood in a very subtle way that the main reason why she was not accepted in the board and later fired was because she was a woman. And she managed to gather enough proof of this and sue this legal firm in Chile for this situation, for gender discrimination, and she won, which this sets a precedent. And this type of precedent can build on breaking this environmental barrier that Nima is discussing. Maybe we can just to give the why I asked this question, because I had recent example in my head, and maybe to finalize, we can pick a question from the audience. From Saint Aslam. At the end, it's a long question, but at the end, he writes simply 2 points. There is a lot of bias, including gender bias, with artificial intelligence. A way to mitigate this is through policy. Africa does not have any. In the meantime, how do you substantively deal with the problem? Maybe we can just make it 30 seconds, each one of you, before we close the session.
I think that I would not necessarily say that Africa does not have a policy. I'll give you an example, for instance. If you look at most of the data protection laws that we have across Africa, there are provisions around automated processing of personal data, for instance, which effectively helps address some of these AI issues and challenges. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there are no policies. I think what we need to do is to look at how to address some of these things, because we can use some of the existing laws and the existing policies to address that. And having said that, personally, I'm not a big driver of legislate for every technology, because very soon you'll find yourself chasing after the technologies. But we look at behaviors that are inappropriate. And I think a lot of the laws, for instance, around data protection that we have, were framed within that context. So in a situation where you want to address issues such as algorithmic bias and the rest, you could actually activate, especially in the context of personal data, you could activate provisions around automated processing of personal data to address some of those challenges. Most of those provisions, for instance, call for a human intervention. So for instance, where you have an automated processing that is addressing, let's say, employee related decisions, promotions, and all of that, under those circumstances, you are mandated by that law to, first of all, make the individual aware that I'm using these automated processing mechanisms, i.e. an algorithm to take decisions on your promotion, on your employment and the like. And then there is a requirement where the individual insists to actually have a human intervention oversee that process. So I think even within that context, you could use some of those existing laws and policies to address some of them.
Thank you very much, Teki. Maybe we can take the approach of our three panelists Um, who would like to answer the same question? Lilian?
So I would like to answer that question maybe by another question to think about. We are always talking about policies or regulations, but most of the time, have we considered how these technologies are implemented or even designed? So as African governments, I see most run to even have a national AI strategy. We are having all these policy documents, but we are still grappling with understanding the technology themselves. So that's just what I had.
Thank you, Lilian. And Nima, once again, the floor is yours.
Well, actually, my response has been responded by both Lillian and Teki, so I have nothing to add.
Okay. Well, I would like to appreciate, and before asking the three panelists to round up in 10 seconds, maybe we can just one reaction from the public. If someone would like to raise its hand and ask a question in real time, or take the floor and ask the question, or maybe make a statement, or whatever he wants to or she wants to contribute in this webinar. Anyone who dare to raise the hand? I don't see any hands raised. No. Well, it seems that the audience is a little bit shy today. However, we have a large audience. Well, we already took one question from the audience, but I see no hand raised. So we can wrap up, and maybe each one of our panelists can present in just a few seconds your thoughts about this first webinar on the part of the webinar series that is going to keep within 1 month. So everybody's invited for the next episode in May. Jackie?
Yes, as concluding remarks, I would like to say that to protect women, especially in this space, we first have to recognize that there are challenges and identify what those challenges are. And we need to also understand that the challenges that women face across Africa is very diverse. And in our approach to addressing those challenges, we need to look at it from that diverse and inclusive manner.
Thank you, Teki. Lillian?
For me, I'd like to say that technologies are products of their time and organizational context. So it will reflect in the knowledge, materials, interests, or even conditions at a given time. And this is the time where we have to indeed look at both, implicit bias from creators or developers, as well as the societal bias when we indeed want to tackle gender inclusivity in AI development.
Thank you very much, Lillian. And Nima, your closing remarks.
We need to understand that technology is a late bloomer in our continent. So we have to accommodate all vulnerable groups that need to have access to technology from different fields, be it women or any other group. So we need to embrace technology, but also we need to accommodate the participants in it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nima, Lillian, Teki. I have put it in the chat, questionnaire for all the audience. I invite you all to answer it. I invite you all also to Thursday, 16th of May, to the second edition of this webinar series. And thanks again to the audience. Thanks again to the panelists. Please answer the questionnaire, and happy to see you, all of you, and even more people within almost 1 month on Thursday, 16th of May, to keep discussing all the impacts of artificial intelligence around gender issues in the judiciary system in Africa. Thank you to UNESCO East Africa office, and of course to the Lawyers Hub. Bye-bye.